Welcome to the Steve Stine Guitar Podcast, brought to you by GuitarZoom.com. If you want to improve your guitar playing, keep listening. If you want to improve even faster, go to GuitarZoom.com, where you'll find all of Steve's premium courses, masterclasses, and memberships that'll help you quickly and easily improve your playing. Now here's your host, Steve Stine.
Welcome to a special episode of the Steve Stine Guitar Podcast. Today we're going to be talking to Brett Williams, amazing classical guitar player. He's going to be telling us a little bit about his recordings, and what I'm really interested in is kind of his daily routine of practice, lessons, all that kind of stuff, because that's kind of what I do too. Well, first of all, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great. I'm really, really happy to be here. It's wonderful to meet you, Steve.
Yeah, it's wonderful to meet you too. How are things going where you live during this whole COVID thing? How are things going for you?
There were ups and downs, but I would say that they went, and I'd say this with respect for what everybody went through, but I would say that more or less everything went pretty well for me. I was able to sort of get an album out last summer, and that doesn't always happen. Usually I'm working pretty hard during the summers at a summer camp for kids where I head up a music program, and it was nice just to be able to sit and come up with things to do. And I did that, as well as a lot more in the composition department, released a lot more episodes on the podcast than I normally would have during the summer. And also because of this new format, I had always interviewed, I think 130 of my episodes were in person. And then after that, I couldn't kind of require that of people anymore. And so, as you know, we had to learn how to do this. And that was super rewarding because I got to talk to a lot of people who I normally would never have been able to talk to. I only talk to people that come through New York City. And now I'm talking to buddies from all over the world and friends from college that have done well for themselves, like Matt Hensley, who's sort of is a guitar education guru in Austin, Texas. And it's been really, really cool in that way. Socially, yeah, it's been hard, I would say. Personally, I think it was a struggle, and I'm alone in New York by myself, so that was a hard thing to go through. But now that everybody's back together and we can all sort of pal around, it's been great.
Yeah, that's awesome. Same thing for me. I mean, I've already been working from home doing this remote stuff and guitar courses and things for the last decade now. So that wasn't so much different, but you're right. It's the isolation stuff that gets a little tough sometimes.
Yeah, I'm professionally for a musician, unless you're sort of a touring musician. I have a friend, Eamon McLaughlin, who's a fiddle player at the Grand Ole Opry. Obviously, he's going to have a hard time when the honky-tonk bars shut down and he's unable to perform at the Opry every week, which was his bread and butter. And that had a complete adverse effect on his career. But, with me, I haven't performed live for about 4 years. I sustained an injury. I actually cut the tendon on my pinky finger, and I took about a year and a half to recover from that. My pinky finger in the left hand did not move. That's our fretting hand for everybody, for most of us, with all due respect to the lefties out there. But coming back from that and going deeper into the composition department and sort of working creatively in isolation was kind of exactly what I needed. I needed time to do that. And not to mention when we do get to the education stuff, which I hope we do, because you obviously are doing a lot of work in that. It really did give me the space that I need with the students because I have a commute. I have a commute from Greenpoint, Brooklyn, the north part of Brooklyn, through Queens, through Manhattan, up to the Upper West Side. And that's where I do all of my teaching. And that commute can take 20 minutes. Or it can take 2 hours. So you have to give yourself an hour, and it's a lot of commuting, and it's kind of exhausting up and down the subways with a guitar, and being able to just sort of sit here and start teaching when I start teaching has been a huge time saver.
Right.
But obviously, so that sort of afforded me more time to do some of the things that I have always wanted to do.
So I have all these other questions I want to get to, but do you think that when things go back to quote unquote normal, you'll still do because I'm assuming you're doing online lessons now, right? That's what you're doing?
Yeah. And again, I never did that either. I always valued that sort of connection. But at this point, the online lessons have been amazing. Some of the kids have been doing better than they did in person. They have a whole different relationship with their devices than people our age did. I'm 44, so I didn't grow up with any of this stuff. There was after school TV And back then it was like Bewitched and like,
Right.
I Dream of Jeannie and maybe some
Right.
G.I. Joe, and that was it. Then you're out of luck. So, they are able to, they're comfortable with, and they're happy to be around these devices in a lot of the cases. And obviously there's been some burnout, a lot of stories about that. But I think the kids have really been resilient, and online lessons for them is allowing them to be in their comfort zone. These are like little guys. I started out teaching all ages, and my mom was a preschool director. So I worked there in the summers in high school and college, and I got my start with that. And then I worked at a preschool when I took a year off to get in-state tuition at the University of Texas. I worked at a preschool for a year. So I started out being an early childhood guy without even intending to be. And at this point, most of my students are young children who are either beginners or intermediates, or who have been with me for a while and are doing well, and they're in high school. But that's sort of where my specialty lies. And I think for them, it's kind of cool. My face is just as big as their face on a screen. You know what I mean? I am not a bigger person. I am not an intimidating dude. So, and that's something I always had to sort of respect and create a sort of a space where it's just like anything else, just like kids. You don't go straight up to a kid and talk to a kid. You take your time, allow them to sort of be themselves, and then engage. But even with new students has been surprisingly effective in creating that sort of distance that I think makes them feel comfortable. And it's going to be weird, especially to meet the ones that I'm going to meet when I do go back into real person in the fall. I've actually talked about it with some of them. I'm like, I've had you for like a year and I've never met you. Isn't that weird? And they're like, yeah, it's so weird. I'm not going to be prepared for that. It's going to be kind of a strange situation. But I think all in all, it's been kind of a win. It's harder to generate students without the live performances. But that's something I could probably talk to you about, because you have such a great structure and infrastructure for that with the website.
Cool. So when things do start going back to normal, do you see yourself still utilizing online, or would you rather be in person the entire time?
The first part of my day is pretty creative. I'm either doing the podcast, or I'm composing, or I'm practicing, because the stuff I play just takes an enormous amount of practice. And I don't know if you heard Yo-Yo Ma and Mark Maron. Did you hear that interview? Well, yeah, Yo-Yo Ma is trying to that was just like last week. And he's trying to sort of explain to Mark Maron, if you don't know who he is, or most people do, but he's sort of the original podcast guy, really. He started it by interviewing other comedians in like 2006 out in Queens, actually, like broke. And now he's doing great. But he's sort of like, he plays like guitar on the side, like an actor or comedian does. And then he's interviewing Yo-Yo Ma, and Yo-Yo Ma's talking about a concert that's coming up. It's going to be really difficult. He has to practice a lot for it. And it was funny because Mark Maron was like, yeah, well, you get up there and you're Yo-Yo Ma. It's going to be fine. And he's like, no, it's not. It's actually, that way. He's like, this stuff is really, really demanding. Even if I released that album last summer and I was practicing something today that I hadn't practiced for like a month, and it's gone. It's completely gone. So the amount of time that I need in the morning is pretty significant. If I can push that further into the day by having online lessons, I would. I don't think I can. I've already got parents going like, we're so excited to have you back. And I'm like, yeah, in the fall, I'm like going to savor every moment of this. And I'm really trying to take advantage of that time. But I would probably rather be online, but I've sort of established myself in the Upper West Side as a guitar teacher and an educator. And I know I'm going to get sucked back in. And I don't know, I might enjoy it, or I might be like, this is bogus. I'm going to go online only. But I don't know how that would work out.
For me, again, about 10 years ago, it was right around there. I'm 50 and I reached burnout. I started teaching when I was 17. And then by the time I was done, I was teaching about 50 hours of lessons a week. I was a professor at our local college, North Dakota State University. And then I was a Montessori instructor for 14 years. And then I was in like 4 bands and then playing in church. And I was doing all of these things at the same time and almost wound up divorced because I had no time for my family. And I never had time for myself. Ever since I was a kid, I never watched TV. I never played video games. It was always just working and playing. And exactly what you're talking about, which is what I talk about to a lot of guitar students and people that are inquiring about it. But it's hard to get time in to do what you want to do when you're doing what everybody else wants you to do. when you're teaching lessons and things like that. So when I finally made the jump to online, I kept thinking in my head, how do I go from having to be present all the time to being able to make money while I'm sleeping? Like with guitar lessons, you might be teaching, people think you're doing all this amazing stuff. And a lot of times, especially with kids, you're teaching G chord or a D chord over and over and over to different students. And after doing that for 10, 15 years, it gets to be a little bit much. And I loved every minute of everything that I did, don't get me wrong, but I just reached a point where instead of doing a one-on-one lesson, how can I do 50 on one online? And this was back in the early days, even more than 10 years ago, I started exploring this stuff, but I really didn't understand anything about what I was doing. Jumped on YouTube and started making videos, and I didn't have a clue what I was doing, where like my buddy Marty Schwartz had really figured it out. He was really smart on, well, having a plan. I was just throwing stuff at the wall to see what would stick. And then things started sticking. So now I'm blessed to be able to have a little more time to work on things of my own and stuff as well.
That's crazy. So your lessons are like 50 people sometimes at the same time?
When I first made the jump over to online, I started working with some different companies, and this was early on, but one of them still is around. There's a company out of New York called lessonface.com. And they're the first ones that I started working with to figure out how I could do like a Saturday morning lesson for an hour, but have multiple people. And Lesson Face, that's exactly what I did. So I would do like 5 lessons a week, and each one of those lessons would have anywhere between 5 and 35 people in them. And that's where that whole thing kind of started in. And again, no disrespect to doing one-on-one lessons. I love one-on-one lessons, and I think they're absolutely crucial to a learning student. But for me as a teacher, I just got to the point where I had to move out of it. Because, the key to being a really good teacher is the energy that you put out into the motivation and encouragement of that student. And you do that every 30 minutes or every 60 minutes or whatever it is, where some teachers don't, it's like, well, this is a side gig. I play on stage and this is what I do to make some extra money. That wasn't my thing. My thing was I love teaching and I love making that connection, but it takes a lot of energy. And when you do it for 30 years, it just takes a lot of energy. So I just needed a break from doing that. And like I said, Lesson Face is where it started. And then GuitarZoom, which is the company that I work with now, started shortly thereafter. And that's a whole story in its own, but I'm here to interview you.
No. I mean, that's huge. And that's so important for me to hear too, because I'm really interested in ideas, especially someone even that's about 6 years older than me. And you know what? That is, yeah, I'm feeling it. I'm feeling the burnout happening. I think I felt it more in my 30s.
Sure.
I think I kind of felt around 35, 36. I was like, I actually tried doing other things. I tried going into marketing. I wrote a little bit of copy for some of my advertising friends, or I was trying to write copy. It didn't go anywhere. And then I kind of overcame it and understood after you get those calls back, once you get old enough to kind of get your students that are adults now, that are like 27, 28 years old, and you get those calls, hey, how you doing? And I'm still playing guitar, or something like that. Or, hey, I just wanted to reach out and see what's up. That kind of gave me a lot of strength to go on too. And to sort of just say, like you're saying that you are a teacher and that you're going to put your energy into it. And that camp that I work out, that was one kid, and I say kid loosely, this was one of the counselors. And he had to teach guitar lessons, probably for the first time in his life on a daily basis in the afternoons. And he just wasn't into it. The guy was a shredder. He just was not into doing this. He wanted to jam. He wanted to get done with the day so he could sit down and get someone on the drums and rip it up. And that's all about. And it became kind of a problem where he wasn't paying attention, or the students were just like somewhere else. I know what you're going through. It's hard for us to be away from our instrument all day because that's what is going on up there. But if you would just take some passion, because you got a lot, and try and put it into one kid at a time, that'll get you through. I mean, that'll make it exciting for you. So that was sort of the step one. And I'm looking at what you're doing and I'm saying, okay, that's true. Eventually I am going to burn out on this, as I can't just keep on running to different things. I mean, part of me not burning out is probably the online thing. That probably was something that happened that gave me a break from just trekking out there every day. And it was different. And eventually that burnout on that too. What I like about what you're saying is there's a performative aspect to teaching. And when you're teaching in a lecture situation, like what you're talking about, and I've done that as a full-time teacher in the Bronx. I was just a music teacher at a charter school. And it had difficulties that didn't really allow me to teach music the way that we're talking about here. There were several different learning disorders occurring in the same classroom. There were like social issues occurring that didn't really give me the opportunities that I was looking for as a music instructor. If I was a social worker or something like that, it would have been great. And I loved that aspect of it. But I never really got the opportunity to become a lecturing educator like what you're talking about. And it seems like GuitarZoom is sort of affording you the opportunity to explore that, the sense that it's go time, it's show time. Like you're saying, doing that 7 times or 8 times a day is exhausting. And it is sort of like, you can't do it all year long. You got to take summers off. Doing it 4 times a day is exhausting. So the idea of being able to kind of just do maybe once or twice a day and address and touch the lives of a lot of students, yeah, that definitely does sound enticing.
Right. Well, and that's the trick too, is that when you do groups versus individuals, if you can do a generalized study, whether it's strumming or picking or chording or something like that, you can get a lot of people in there and they can all learn at the same time. And for me, that was kind of the biggest, other than the fact that I finally had time to reconnect with my family and things like that, of having some actual free time for my sanity. The beauty was I could wake up every day and go, what do I want to talk about? What do I want to teach? Versus Timmy didn't practice his chord again, so we're going to go through that again for the 4th week in a row. And again, I'm not dogging it. I loved it. It's just I got to the point where I couldn't do it anymore. And that's not beneficial for me. And it's most certainly not beneficial for the student. And so being able to get up and make videos for social media or make guitar courses or whatever on things that obviously they need to know. But then if I'm in a mood where, hey, I've been practicing something and I think it would be really beneficial for someone to see this thing that I'm working on, I could talk about that. Where in my private lessons, 1 out of 50 students would be at that place where I could actually have that conversation. So that's one of the most freeing things about what I'm doing now, and what you could do sometime as well, is that element. Just, and again, the more honest you are, the more people watch it and go, hey, thank you. I enjoyed what that was, and maybe I can use it, maybe I can't, but I enjoyed watching you and your authentic approach to talking and teaching.
Well, you're talking about that authenticity is the operative word. And you can't do a good job if you're not happy doing it.
That's right.
And that's the thing. It's like, you just got to be honest with yourself as a teacher and go like, this isn't working. Like, I'm an unhappy person when I'm teaching. And that's, yeah, like you're saying, especially when you're working, not just with kids, but with anybody. They're putting, all these programs cost them a pretty substantial chunk of change, any sort of education. And rightly so. I mean, you and I are not rolling in money at all, not even close. So even though it seems like it's a lot, it's really not. But sort of respecting that, and respecting that they are giving their time to us as well, and that we need to sort of cultivate a mood. And in order to do that, yeah, we do have to be honest about what we can do and move on and advance in what we're doing. So yeah, I mean, now that we're kind of talking about this, moving to online only instruction is something that might happen. It's just so, I don't know, where are you located? Are you in California?
No, I'm in North Dakota, as a matter of fact. I'm right up near the Canadian border. So we've been pretty open compared to New York or California or something like that. I have a 20-year-old daughter, and then I have a 12-year-old daughter. And my 12-year-old this year in school only missed like the first week or 2 of the school year due to COVID. And since then, they've been in school the entire year. We've been in school, and with masks and things like that. But at the end of last year, when COVID hit, she was struggling online trying to learn. But of course, the teachers were struggling trying to figure out a curriculum that would work online. Everything happened so quickly. So we were blessed to be able to have her in school. And so we haven't felt it as much as some other people around the country in terms of really, really, really locking down.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely felt it here. I mean, as you know.
Right.
Yeah, I think that the sort of, New York is a very social city. And it's kind of part of the expectation is that you're able to walk outside and have a personal relationship with your environment and with the people in it. So that's sort of why I think a lot of people live here. The feeling I'm getting from people in an area like this is that they really do want me to come in.
Right.
And I think that's kind of like a New York thing, is that we're all around each other all the time. We're all crowded. Sometimes it sucks. Sometimes it's kind of funny. Sometimes it's great. But most of the time it sucks. Uh, but you're kind of like digging through the muck to find that diamond. And you do find those diamonds once in a while. And I think that can happen. A one-on-one relationship with the students is awesome. And like you said, I don't think that there's quite a replacement for that. I remember I told my guitar teacher, Bill Simon, who was just a saxophone player. I mean, he kind of played guitar on the side. My first guitar teacher, Bill. This was in Stockton, California. And I told him about my first kiss. I mean, I had a girl who told me, little Sophie. Sophie's now about 26, but she told me, she goes, I wrote a Valentine to a boy and it worked. And I was like, what? That's great. So those relationships to me are so important. I would never want to get rid of them completely. But like I said, I mean, I do have like a showman's sort of approach to what I do. And even when I'm one-on-one, it would be nice to sort of just like do a little meditation and then turn on the lights and go. And it would actually invigorate, I think, the one-on-one lessons as well and sort of inform those. I know that working in the Bronx as a classroom teacher certainly did. My level of patience went through the roof. As a matter of fact, I think that was sort of where I took the turn and started to really appreciate being a guitar teacher and saying to people, what do you do for a living? I'm a guitar teacher. That's kind of what I say now.
Right.
And I say, I'm accomplished as a guitarist. But I have a lot of pride now saying guitar teacher. It's not something I'm doing on the side it's something I want to do for the rest of my life now. And that's something I would have said 10 years ago.
That's right. I mean, and for some people, it's a hard pill to swallow. For me, that's what I figured out. When I was 17, I had my first guitar lesson and I knew I had the tongue for explaining how things worked. And I had the patience and the ability to listen, like you were just talking about, having relationships with guitar students. And it's not just like, I never ever used a book in lessons. I would always, the student would come in and they'd sit down and they'd say, tell me about yourself and tell me what you want and tell me what you like and where can we meet in the middle of, now we're going to learn how to play this guitar, and always trying to find things to motivate them. But I even think about my time spent, obviously you're familiar with Montessori education. Those are some of my favorite years, and they had nothing to do with guitar. It just had to do with teaching music, and just love that. I mean, I love being on stage and I love all of that kind of stuff too, but I know that God put me on this planet to be a teacher. So that's what I do.
He 100% did. And it's just this, we obviously know, and it's sort of like, it's a tired old refrain that teachers don't get enough pay. Teachers don't get enough respect. It's true. It may always be true, certainly during our lifetime. And obviously teachers are taken for granted. Just look at a friend last weekend was playing a board game that I know how to play. I was playing Catan, and I was explaining how to play Catan to somebody, and they were like, wow, that was really good. How did you do that? And I said, oh, well, I don't know. And then they go, well, no, my friend tried to explain it to me and it was a mess. I had no idea. I played it. I had no idea what I was doing. And they were like, within 10 minutes, you were able to articulate it.
Sure.
And I think it's true. And the way I teach Catan is I say, okay, you want to get 10 points. And like you said, so that's, you establish a goal, then you work your way backwards. And that's when we're talking about, the student coming in and you not necessarily having a game plan, but knowing the first thing you have to do is establish a goal.
That's right.
So the goal for Catan is 10 points. And then you slowly explain how you get those 10 points. And that's the same thing applies to the guitar and to the way that you're working with students. The big issue that a lot of teachers have, especially in my classical guitar field, because I teach all styles at this point. I had to learn jazz. I had to learn how to play a 13 chord. I didn't know that. And I had enough kids that had jazz auditions for high school that I was like, I better just get up in the morning and play each chord form until I know it for a year. And getting those goals set is the responsibility of the student. Sure, it's also our responsibility to not be rigid in our approach. And I know a lot of young classical guitar teachers that are like, no, you're going to start with the shear method or the node method, and you're going to work your way up through that. And one of my favorite master classes was when I was younger. It was in San Antonio, Texas, at the Guitar Foundation of America. I don't know if it was that. Was it that? I don't remember. But it was Randy Avers, who's a guitarist who went to Oberlin, and now it's just great guy. I got to interview him. But I asked a girl who was in a master class to play an A chord, and she couldn't do it. And there was like an audible gasp, but it made sense that she couldn't do it.
Right.
She was never asked to do it because in the classical world, you're dealing with note to note. You're dealing with a horizontal approach to music as opposed to a vertical, a stack of notes on top of a chord. So for her not to know that A chord really was just like, that struck something in me. And I was like, I don't want no student of mine is not going to know that. And I have students that like the graded approach of the FJH method. And they get addicted to it. They're like, okay, I learn one note, then I learn another note. I learn a quarter note, then I learn a half note.
Right.
And then in the next book, I'm going to learn eighth notes. And it's just like this graded, slow approach that gives you a sense of progression. And they hate it. Those kids hate it when I'm like, no. Now you got to learn chords. And they're like, I don't want to. This is hard. I don't want to do it. I can't believe it. And I'm like, but you have to understand that all the music that you like, that your parents probably like, is this chord stuff.
Right.
Same thing with the jazz chords. Every kid who's going into high school, I'm like, you're going to learn all these chords and we're just going to go through them every week. I don't want to. And I'm like, you'll want to. You'll want to know that when you're like me and you're auditioning for jazz band and you don't get in,
Right.
even though you're the best guitarist in the school, because you don't know how to read a chart. So it's sort of like a mixture of making sure that everybody gets what they need, but at the same time allowing the students to set their goal and have agency. So just sort of mixing all those things in is so important in an instructor.
Sure. Well, that's great. I hope you're enjoying this episode so far and you're getting motivated to take your guitar playing to the next level. Please do me a favor and leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts. It'll help the show grow and reach more rock stars like you who want to improve their guitar playing. Also, I'd love to know what parts of the episode you liked, as well as what you learned. So please share this podcast and tag us at GuitarZoom.com on your social post. And now, let's get back to the podcast. All right, we're going to shift gears for a little bit. Tell me a little bit about how you got into guitar playing. Like, what motivated you or inspired you to pick up the guitar and go the direction you did?
My uncle, Dirk Hamilton, he is a folk musician, and he wasn't famous ever, which I can completely empathize with.
Right.
But he was very unique and really cool in his use of the guitar. No one quite sounded like him. Maybe he sounded like Van Morrison a little bit, but it was the 80s, so it had that sort of, I don't know, kind of like funky experimentalism in it. And it was the 70s when he got started, the mid 70s. And he went to school, came back, folk was dead, it was over. And so he had to kind of work his way through that. But his use of the guitar was really effective. He would do strumming patterns. He didn't just like strum like most, not, no offense to folk musicians, but
Sure.
like most sort of, most of those people do. The guitar is simply just a backdrop for the lyrics. For him, the guitar was like an active participant. It was a player. And I would do the door for him at Blackwater Cafe in Stockton and just watch. And then he gave me a guitar when I was 8. And I started learning just rock and roll and stuff. And then I had a girlfriend who was an opera, going into college as an opera major. And I was like, oh, I really want to hang out with Amy more, but she's going to Vanderbilt for opera. And I'm going to junior college for nothing.
Right.
So why don't I learn how to play music so that I can get into music school too? And I spent 2 years just busting my butt. Yeah, I was just working so hard and I got into like a couple of state schools and I was like, I think I'm going to sit this out, stay home, save money, and try and get into some real guitar schools. So I did. And I got good enough to get into. I played well before, but I had to learn from a guy named Terry Mills, who was at the University of the Pacific, how to play classical guitar. And I think I just sort of brought to it a vulnerability that informed my musicality in a way that sort of made me relatively unique to the other classical guitarists at that time. And I was able to get into all the schools. I got into Vanderbilt, couldn't afford it, but got into Vanderbilt, went to Texas instead. Amy and I broke up. And and she's great, though. Actually, she's wonderful. I actually just told her on Facebook, I said, you're responsible for a lot of this stuff because we hadn't talked in 20 years. And she's doing the exact same thing we're doing. She's doing voice lessons. She's performing with the Mountain View Opera Company, and I'm real proud of her. And we still have just a great sort of respect for each other. And it's wonderful that we kept in touch over the years. Yeah, so that sort of is how it that's sort of the genesis of the guitar playing, and then how it sort of manifested into interest with classical music. It doesn't generally work out that way. Generally, you don't like go into classical music to get chicks, but it it worked out in this case. And then went in Texas with Adam Holzman. That is an incredibly competitive program. There's probably more competition winners that came out of there than anywhere else. He took me on as a let's see how you do kid for a year. I wasn't even part of the program. I just took a shot, moved out there, and I got into the college, but I didn't get into the music school right away. Very, very, whatever. And then I took about 5 years there. And by the time I left there, I was pretty good, but I had a lot of stage fright, and I moved to New York to do grad work at the Mannes School of Music, part of New School, with Fred Hand as my principal teacher. Mike Newman was also there. I worked with him. Terry Chaplin was there, and I just wanted to be in New York. So I moved to New York to go to grad school here. And by the time I left there, Fred was able to sort of, getting out of such a competitive program like Texas, where there were older kids, there were people that were 30 that were competing in these big competitions. And I wasn't ever necessarily that kind of a player. And then going to a smaller school with a much warmer atmosphere and a much sort of, I think Adam would admit this, Adam was an amazing teacher. And I still refer to him whenever I'm thinking about the guitar. I think about it in his language. But when studying with Fred, he gave me back my confidence, and I was able to perform again, because stage fright is super real, and you can be amazing by yourself. And then you get out there, and if you don't have experience on stage, it all just falls apart.
Right.
So I had those experiences of it falling apart and me not being able to express myself in the way that I held myself responsible to express myself. And I was able to get that out of Fred and out of New York, which actually is a much warmer and welcoming guitar scene, I think, than a lot of other places. It's just a little bit more personal. You be you and I'll be me sort of thing. Whereas I think in other places, it might be a lot more homogenous. There's one place to go and one place to express yourself. And in here, you got Juilliard, you've got the rest of Lincoln Center, you've got a great guitar society headed by John Olson, or you could just move to Brooklyn and hang out with a bunch of crazy people and, like you say, see what sticks, which is my approach.
Very cool. That's awesome. I also want to know too, what kind of advice would you give for a musician trying to make, because again, in today's modern society, I always tell people being able to avoid putting all your eggs in one basket nowadays, because you can't make much money off records and that sort of thing anymore, recorded music. What kind of advice would you give to someone who's trying to get somewhere in this music industry?
Well, I would give them the advice. I just said this, so I feel but I'm assuming different audiences. I said this on someone else's interview last week. There were some competitors, and it was a competition. I was judging in the competition. It was the Latin American Guitar Festival. My friend Zaira, who's heading that up, asked me sort of the same question about, is there anything you want to say to the competitors? And these are kids that are, I said, well, I do want to speak to the competitors, but I want to speak to the people that didn't make it into the finals. If you made it into the finals, great. Congratulations. That's excellent. Hard work. But if you didn't, the thing is that a lot of the reason why they are in these guitar competitions, which I have kind of a negative sort of feeling about that. I'm not all in on the competition culture. I don't think it's a great way to judge a person. I don't think it's fair to sort of have someone go through, and get advanced degrees in their art form and then be told that they're not good enough because some ninja comes over from Germany and destroys everybody in the competition. So I would say that if you can sort of approach this, and not in terms of a career, because everybody's thinking career. What am I going to do? How am I going to justify doing this? How am I going to support my family or myself in the same? Instead of approaching it that way, if you approach it in terms of service and saying, what can I do? Create a mission statement and think about what you can do. What are your strengths? not the strengths that you've developed or cultivated at guitar school or in your band or whatever, but what are your personal strengths? And how can you translate those into something that serves the instrument? Because at the end of the day, if you're serving the instrument, that's what, a friend of Matt Hensley, the guy from Texas, I'm kind of stealing this from him, this part, but he said that the money and the career, that all comes once you create something where you're not serving yourself, where you're not just thinking about your immediate surroundings. Always important to think about family, and that should be something that's always guarded. But I think that sort of thinking about serving something else, almost on an equal playing field, an equal level, is really important to being a successful artist. Being a successful artist, not a successful career. There's professional musicians and there's artists, and you can be a professional musician and that's great. But I also think that if you approach that in terms of service, instead of constantly going like, this gig isn't making me enough money, or this gig, if you follow your heart and you do what you want to do, then that's at least one person that you agree with. There's got to be other people out there that are going to agree with you.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
There's got to be. So when I'm writing a piece of music, I can't just sit there and go like, oh, this has to be more flamenco because my last piece was too jazzy. Oh, I shouldn't write tonal music because atonality will get me more clout with the academics in New York City.
Right.
No, I'm going to write tonal music because it's pretty music and that's what I want to hear. J.R.R. Tolkien said that he wrote Lord of the Rings because he wanted to write something that he wanted to read. And that's it. And thus the fantasy genre was born. So I think that if you can just sort of thinking about serving the instrument and then what you can do, and then coupling that with just sort of honestly making what you want to make, what you think is pretty,
right,
or what you think is effective, or what you think expresses your anger or your sadness in the way that it needs to be expressed, then that will reach somebody else because we're more alike than we are different. And I think that that's probably the two pieces of advice I can give.
That's awesome.
Is relatively happy.
Yeah, I totally agree, man. We talked about before, I think if you're authentic at what it is that you're doing, somebody out there is going to care. And now in 2021, because I get a lot of people that will go, well, why do people even do music? I mean, there's no music, there's no money in it anymore. Maybe that's a good thing. Like maybe that's something that athletes should experience as well, is going from a time back in the 80s where people were making just massive amounts of money to why do we do it now? Because you love it. You do it because you love it. Just do it because of the potential almighty dollar, because that may not exist. And like I said, for me, it's diversification. If you're a good teacher, if you can get out of just where you are, if you can reach somebody else somewhere else in the country or somewhere else in the world that could be affected by your talent, which can happen. So that's another thing that's really nice too, is just to remember that the world is really small. Once you start doing all this stuff, the world becomes a very small place.
It is definitely. We are in agreement.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. Well, let me know if somebody is interested that's listening to this and they want to get a hold of you or they want to listen to your music. What's the easiest way to do those things?
Well, I think that you could just go to the website, which is brettwilliamsmusic.com. And that's BRET Williamsmusic.com. And that has the bio section. The other way is my podcast has been doing as well as a podcast can do that's about classical guitar. It's called Classical Guitar Insider. And it's been going on for 8 years. And that's a big part of what I do. It's a big part of the way that I keep in touch with my community of guitarists.
Awesome.
And it's when I started that, there were none really. I think there was a guy in Los Angeles doing it. I don't think he does it anymore. And then there's me. And now there's a lot of people doing it. But that is part of what I do. So Classical Guitar Insider and BrettWilliamsMusic.com. And it's Brett with one T. It's
Very
not
cool.
two.
So
I think the guy with two is like a Christian rock guy.
Oh,
I think
okay.
That's what he is, which is fine. It's just, it's a different, it's not
you.
I'm not wearing a cowboy hat. I would wear one.
So can they sign up for online? Do you have online lessons available if they're not in your area, if they go to that website?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I don't really market myself well as an online guy, but certainly nothing like what you're doing. I mean, what you're doing is beautiful. It's such a cool web. I mean, congratulations on it.
Thank you.
Yeah. If they want to get hold of me, it's just, they can get through with the email, which is awesome. On the contact list, Brett at BrettWilliamsMusic.com. Cool. They can get in contact with me directly for any sort of inquiries.
Okay. Well, thank you for spending almost an hour with me. This has been great, man. It's been nice talking to you.
It's been great talking to you too. It's always fun to get to know somebody, and it's a complete honor to be invited on a show. And I hope I didn't talk too much.
Oh gosh, no, it was wonderful. It was just perfect. So, well, you have a great day and take care. And hopefully we'll keep in touch after this is over, and good luck with everything that you do, man.
Good luck to you too. And congratulations on the site. And thanks so much, Steve.
All right. Take care, my friend.
Take care.
If you enjoyed today's podcast and want to learn guitar even faster, go to guitarzoom.com and click the Get Started button to get access to courses that are right for your interest and skill level. Again, go to guitarzoom.com and click the Get Started button.